So welcome to the first tutorial with Kirsty and Stuart. Today we're going to be making a basic kitenge tote bag, just like this one. And we have all the pieces that you need here. So we've got front and back panels, and the measurements here, cut 2. We've got handles, you need to cut 2 again, the measurements are there. We've got the side gusset, you cut 2 of these also, measurements there, and the bottom gusset, which you cut 1 of. These are for a very simple book bag style tote. You can change the measurements and make it into a usable tote for lots of different things, just by changing the shape and size and scale of your bag. Let's get started. So what we're going to do is find the bottom of your bag and pin the gusset to the front and the back of the tote bag panels. Put your pins in at a right angle to the seam line, and this means you can stitch right over it without damaging your machine, and it just keeps everything neat and straight, especially when you're working on bigger pieces. It really helps to have your pins in at a right angle. Right to the edge, just putting a few in to keep it secure. Flip it over, make sure all your right sides are out. And what I mean by right sides is that you've got the strongest print colour, so you'll see there's a slightly more faded on the back. It's more obvious on some fabrics over others, and it just means you've got the brightest fabric, the brightest colours on the outside. So we're pinning to the back now. This fabric's a great fabric to work with. It's got a slight waxiness to it, which means it's easy to sew, it's easy to handle, and of course it's got a beautiful print. Okay, last pin. Last pin, and we're ready to sew. So that's the base, the gusset, front and the back. So we're going to sew across the base, the gusset line here, and I'm sewing just in about 5mm. It's quite close to the edge compared to other seam allowances, and that will become apparent at the next stage. But just sew a straight line right across both ends of the gusset to start with. And remember to do a forward and back stitch to secure as well. That pin is not quite at a right angle, but never mind. If you use pins with big heads, just be aware they might become squint. I'm just going to start pulling mine out from now on in. It's making me nervous. And then onto the other edge, again about 5mm, start, stitch forward, stitch back, stitch forward again, and I'm just going to take my pins out again. So I've stitched down both sides now, as you can see. What you want to do is you want to trim off your threads and trim off any excess fabric in the seam allowance. Just trim it quite close, so you've just really got about 3mm left all the way down. So the next stage, we are pinning the side gusset into the bag. So using the front and back panels to start with, and we're going to pin down one edge of the side panel. Again, Keep your pins at a right angle, maybe use pins with smaller heads to make it a bit easier. I like these because they're colourful, can't lose them. Pin right down to this bottom edge here, so you're touching the bottom gusset basically. Okay, when you get to here, then you want to stitch right down. We're going to stitch right from the top to the bottom gusset, then going to stitch the bottom gusset to the side gusset, and then up the other side, and we'll be on the home streets up the back of the bag. So again, you're going to sew really close to the edge, about 5mm from the top to the bottom of the front or back panel. And then we're going to go round the bottom, so you're sewing side gusset to bottom gusset and then up the top. I'll show you as we go. Remember, when you start, you want to stitch forward, back, forward again to secure that edge. Let's go. Okay, we're coming close to the bottom now, so I'm just going to make sure everything's straight up to the edge of the seams, the side gusset's not getting ruffled, and you want to sew straight down to stop at the seam there, and then back up again. So I've taken the tote bag out from under the needle. I realised that you need to be able to line up the side and bottom gusset without the needle in the way. So I've lined those up, turned the bag slightly so that they're joined up, and I'm going to pin across the bottom gusset and the side gusset so they're now together to create that shape within your tote bag. And you want to do the same thing, stitch across the bottom 5mm seam allowance. When you get to the end again, so right to the edge of the seam allowance that's already there, then back just to secure it and lift it out from under the foot. Snip it off, and you're going to want to match the last seam, which is round the corner, and that's the side gusset and the back of the bag. So I've taken the fabric out of the machine, we've sewn down the front and side panel, we've sewn across the bottom gusset and side gusset, and it's really starting to take more of a 3D shape now. And the last seam that we're going to make just now is up from the bottom gusset up the back. So we're going to match those sides again, manipulating and turning the bag slightly, and we're going to pin that in place. Right down this edge here. All the way to the top. There might be a slight difference in the seam allowance, but we can trim that off. Okay, then we're ready to stitch from the bottom to the top of the bag. So we're sewing now from the bottom, the base of the tote bag, right up to the top on the last side of the seam allowance. So you can now see this is the side gusset into the tote bag, along with the bottom gusset, so it's really starting to take that 3D shape. What you need to do now is trim along each of the 3 edges, cutting off any excess raggy edges and threads before we turn it inside out and complete the French seam. So cutting off the excess edge, so you're leaving about 3mm seam allowance all the way around the seam that you've just sewn. So we're now ready to stitch right round and finish the French seam on one side. As you can see, I've pinned down each edge and the bottom of the gusset, and you're going to stitch all the way round. It can be tricky to do it all in a one, so sometimes it's best to stitch down the sides and complete the bottom last. So you're going to sew right from the top to the bottom of the side gusset here and side panel. You want to take your seam allowance a little bit deeper, so even just 6mm, it just means that everything, all the messy bits on the inside will be enclosed in this seam. So, and remember, when you start to sew, stitch forward, stitch back, stitch forward again, and that'll secure your seam. So first seam, then onto the second side seam, closing that one. And then finish with the bottom of the bag and just turn that so it's nice and flat and even. You can get a wee bit lumpy there, so just make sure your foot is still moving. and then you're ready to turn inside out. You noticed there that my machine got a little bit stuck, and it was just at the point where all the seams were meeting and it created a little bit of a lump. You just need to put your needle down, lift your foot, adjust it slightly until it gets traction to move forward. Just be aware of that, or you end up with a big knot of thread at the back. Now we're ready to turn inside out and see the French seam in all its beauty. So this is your French seam on the inside now, and this is turning it out to the outside of the bag. So you can see it's really neat, really tidy on the inside and on the outside, and it gives it an extra strong seam allowance. Bear in mind, we've done the side gusset and we've completed the French seam, but make sure you also finish your the base gusset as well, and you need to do the same thing again. Turn it in on itself and pin along. Just going to flatten this out so you can see what we're looking at here. This is the inside of the bag. Use your fingers to press right along that seam, right along the other base seam, pin, and then sew right to the edges. And again, this will enclose all your seam in the French seam style, so that you've got a nice tidy bag. So once you've completed base, the side, you need to go on to do the second side in exactly the same way that we did the first side. So that's the bag base finished. You can see all the way around we've got nice neat French seams and inside and out. Trim off any extra threads that are hanging out, and then we're ready to put the handles in. Okay, we're going to stitch up the handles next. So I have cut and prepared the handles, fold them in half, and you're going to sew down this edge to close the seam. This time you can take a slightly wider seam allowance, so about 3/4 of a centimetre or something like that. Pop it in and stitch from the top to the bottom, remembering to reverse and sew forward at each end of the handle. When you've sewn down it, what I want you to do is trim the excess edge off this side after you've sewn it. Once you've sewn down the handle edge and trimmed it, what you need to do is turn it inside out so that this raw edge is on the inside. You do that using a safety pin, pop it in close to the stitched edge, then turn it in carefully in on itself, feeding it through the tube of the handle. It can be a bit tricky, you just need to feed it through and unwrinkle some of the fabric around the safety pin without opening the safety pin. So keep pushing and feeding it through, and it'll start to become a little bit easier as you go along. So I fed the safety pin right through to the other end, and now you can just pull that right through, and you'll see the handle feeding through, turning it inside out. Just be careful you don't get a knot at the end here. That's be the tricky bit, like so. Okay, so take out safety pin, and you do want to take this to the ironing board and flatten it out so that you've got one edge as your sewn edge and the other edge is your fold edge, and press that flat from top to bottom so that you've not got a curly handle. So here's the handle which has been pressed with a hot iron, and I've also stitched down one edge from top to bottom. This makes it stronger. What I'd recommend is stitching from top to bottom on the other side as well, so you've got a nice even handle that's got an extra strength to it with the double stitch line. So you're sewing all the way around, making sure it's open underneath, not sewing the edges together. Okay, so I've pressed the stitch line right the way around the top of the bag, so just folded where we've stitched and pressed with a hot iron. Then I've marked the centre point of the front panel, and I'll do the same again on the back point. And what I want you to do is now place the handles in on top of the folded line. So I'm just eyeballing it and picking a point midway across from the centre point to the side seam edge, and I'm just going to pin that in place. So we've got the handles all ready to go. Make sure they're straight, there's no kinks or twirls, so it goes all the way round. And again, pin that in place there. What you want to do is now take that to the sewing machine, and you're just going to sew the handles in place, so just sewing across the top edge here and the top edge here. Once that's been stitched, you'll take your pin out, your stitch line will hold this in place, and that will then be folded in about 2 centimeters deep all the way around. Again, you're going to fold that all the way around, and you're going to have the second handle in as well, and then you're going to stitch around that as well. So you want it to be just slightly deeper for the second fold line. Okay, so here's the bag with the handles. The handles have been stitched in place, and I folded the seam allowance in on itself again so that the handles are double back on themselves. And we're now just about ready to sew right the way around and complete the bag. The final stage with the handles is to flip them back on themselves, so you hide that stitch line and you're going to stitch through them twice. This gives the bag extra strength again for carrying heavy things. So just pin the handles back up so that they will then be finished pointing upwards from the bag. Okay, so round each of the different handles, pinning them in place over the stitch line to secure them before you sew. So you want to keep it nice and straight all the way around, because this is a stitch line that's actually going to be on show on the outer edge, and you might want to choose your thread colour carefully as well. Keep it as neat as you can, following the fold line here and the handle line as well. Gets a little bit bulky over the handles, so just make sure you're lifting your foot, and you can always place your needle down as well, keeping the handle length out of your load. Just make sure you're keeping it flat and turning as you go right the way around the bag. Watching out for those bulky seams. So we're now back to the finish. Trim your threads, sew them in, and that's your bag with your handles now fully attached. You could also top stitch right around the edge, and again that keeps the handles in place, keeps it neat and tidy. It's up to you if you want a second stitch line or not, but otherwise your bag is ready, finished and good to go. And here is the finished Katenga tote bag. So thank you so much for joining the tutorial today. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned a lot from it. This is a basic shape that you can use in lots and many different ways if you alter the pattern just ever so slightly. You can also add pockets to the front, pockets on the inside, change the length of the handles. It's up to you how you want to use it. So let me know how you get on and which Katenga tote bags you go on to make. Thank you very much. This is Christine Stewart.